Shwmae a chroeso I Sgwrs, podlediad Consortiwm Canolbarth y De. Yn y podlediad hwn byddwch chi'n clywed y trafodaethau diweddara am bob math o bethau addysg. Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the Central South Consortium podcast. In this podcast we'll bring you the very latest discussions on all things education.
Hello and welcome to Sgwrs, the podcast series from CSC. My name is Catherine Billington-Richards and I'm the Strategic Lead for LLC. In this podcast, I'm joined by Louise Clark from Pencoed Comprehensive School. Louise is both the Head of History and the Literacy Lead and Assistant Head Teacher. And in this episode, we're going to discuss developing a rigorous reading curriculum. Thanks for joining us, Louise. First of all, can you tell us about what prompted you to start looking at a reading curriculum?
Hi, Kath. Thanks for having me and asking me to get involved. So in terms of our reading curriculum, we very sort of prided ourselves for many years in Pencoed on a reading culture. And I think what the time away from the classroom, moving on to online learning, really gave us time to reflect on how to move forward with our reading curriculum in line with, you know, all the training and the pedagogy and the thinking that was out there. We also needed to make it far more bespoke to our learners. So we regularly test our learners using the online national reading tests. We've also purchased the National Group Reading Test programme as well. So we're constantly using data to see where our learners are and how they need to make progress. But I think the bigger issue is about ensuring we have that culture for reading and the love of reading, because we're really mindful that when these learners are getting to year 10 and 11, they're sitting exam papers, with very complex language, source material, texts across a range of different subjects. And for some of our learners, they were not equipped really to decode or to access and really show off their potential. So it was just about really going back to basics and ensuring that we had the provision in place, and then starting from scratch really and thinking, right, where are we? What do we need to be doing in line with the new curriculum, and using that opportunity as well.
That's great. So really thinking of Curriculum for Wales almost as like an opportunity for a catalyst to change. That's great. So when you were looking at developing this, what were the sort of first steps that you took when looking at developing a school-wide reading curriculum?
So I approach it from a few different ways really, where looking really at culture, about how to enthuse learners about reading, particularly since, you know, we had such a gap from seeing them from face-to-face learning experiences. You know, whilst we knew that some learners perhaps continued that diet of literacy at home, others may not have had that opportunity. So it's about ensuring that when they were in school with us, that culture was or is being disseminated and fostered. We've also looked then in terms of pedagogy about, you know, the fundamentals really of, you know, of literacy. We've embedded the LNF for years. You know, it's explicit and implicit within schemes of learning, lesson experiences, learning experiences, so many different ways. But as I mentioned earlier, there's been so much more move now, isn't there, with lots of programmes out there, Reading Reconsidered, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. Yeah. But yeah, so we've essentially looked at the culture, we've looked at the pedagogy, and then using the Curriculum for Wales then about that learning experience opportunity within AOLEs, about how we now sort of move really with the times, and ensuring that what we're giving these learners is the adequate provision as a basic, and then pushing then ensuring a high challenge in the classroom in terms of literacy.
That's great. I know you also set up some sort of structures within school to support this, didn't you? You set up PLCs, for example. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you set up and the impact that's had.
Yes, we've got a couple of groups running. We had a literacy pedagogy group which met last year, which we were lucky for you to attend to this as well, where I asked heads of department or curriculum leads, as we're calling them now, and those then associated with AOLEs, I asked them really to reflect on the diet of literacy within their curriculum areas. Within my own curriculum area, we're really conscious with history that, you know, perhaps we needed to have a far wider scope of historians, making sure we're addressing the gender issue, we're addressing race issue, and we're not giving pupils the diet of 1970s historians' views, and we needed to be up to date with things. So I asked them to go back and really reflect on the types of texts and the quality and the provenance of the text, really, where they've come from. And that was a really interesting exercise. Like the English department had a really good audit of the novels, and found that they were perhaps quite sort of, there was a bit of a gender bias towards males in terms of novels and provision there. History, we had a really good look about bringing everything up to date, and in terms of our history provision. So that was one group that's sort of running alongside. We haven't done as much of that group this academic year because everything has been about Curriculum for Wales focus, but that's something we will pick up. And then one of the whole school professional development opportunities are our PLC programmes. And literacy is always there. So the leadership team have always ensured that literacy and numeracy, the essential skills for our learners, really for the key to success, is always within our PLC programme in some format or some focus. So this academic year, we are focusing on reading. And myself and the head of English were really fortunate to be released to attend the Doug Limov Reading Reconsidered course run by Central South, and now we're using that vehicle to disseminate the training with a view then of enacting change from September with our Year 7 learners.
That's great. And we'll come on to Read and Reconsider actually a little bit later in the podcast. Can I just touch on, you talked about auditing provision, and for listeners, they may not be aware that we developed, didn't we, a sort of reading audit form that we sent out to staff, and it sort of looked at the length of text, the type of reading, what drove choices of text in different modules, and what was staff's reaction to being asked those sorts of questions?
I think at the start they were a bit bemused maybe, and I know some of them were a bit worried. So I know the International Languages Department were concerned because obviously they're quite textbook heavy, and they were worried about, how would that reflect to them. And I was trying to reassure them there was no threat behind this, so there was no judgment to be made on it. And all it would do was allow us as a school really to audit the types of resources that we're purchasing for our learners to make sure that the learning experiences are worthwhile, and we are giving them that cultural capital, within our learning experiences as well. And I think after speaking then to the members of staff who joined the group and completed the audit, I think when they could see on paper that perhaps there was, as a head of department, you just inherit what you've got. I've been head of department for about 15, 16 years, and I've still got textbooks in the cupboard that I don't think will ever see the light of day again. I learned from them in my GCSEs in the 1990s. So I think it's about us having that time to reflect and realise we don't have to go with what's there, that there's other things out there. And then I think that gives more sort of power then to us go into the leadership team and say, look, we need to make a change. And we were fortunate last year when we had a look at the library resources that our head teacher gave an injection of funding that we could purchase new, fiction and non-fiction books for learners as well. So yeah, to go back to your question, really, staff, I think, give them time to reflect. And I know, the RV department are always progressive in terms of literacy provision across the school. So I know they are really on board. And I know departments in the LLC, AOLE as well, that they are, looking at refining their practice and the provision that's in front of them as a result of it.
That's great. Thanks, Lou. So you're talking there about obviously, the PLC group, but I know that you really enacted on the information in your own history classroom, and as a result of that, you've sort of introduced a reading element to your curriculum planning for history. I just wondered if you could talk us through that. And
absolutely. So during lockdown, the first lovely summery lockdown, my colleague and I, Ms. Georgia Edwards, we took the opportunity to do as many sort of online courses as we possibly could. So we attended the TM History Teachers Icon meetings and encountered lots of history teachers and practitioners across the UK who were really pushing a scholarship focus in terms of their provision. And it's something that we've always wanted to do, but we had the time really then to embed it. So we put in, Twitter, I think, is one of the best opportunities for CPD, and we follow numerous historian and historical teachers on there as well. So we started to put in, and I can't remember for the life of me which historian, I think it was Greg Thornton on Twitter. They were doing this story source scholarship approach where we did guided reading, and then we looked at a historian's view, and then we looked then at developing evaluation skills. But what we found then is that the learners were not used to that diet of high quality scholarship, you know, at that academic level and vocabulary. And whilst we were implemented them here, there and everywhere, strategic points across schemes of learning, they didn't have the skills, or to be honest, the confidence, the resilience to really deal with them. And then obviously then, you know, being the sort of pedagogy geek that I am and reading Mary Myatt, who is just amazing, you know, and
she is.
what she talks about, you know, sort of high challenge, low threat, that really resonated with me. So what we've decided to do is link really either a fiction or a non-fiction text with each of our topics across our schemes of learning and our learning experiences. So at the moment we're teaching, so just to give some context, we are linked up as a humanities AOLE. We've been working as an AOLE for 7 years now in Pencoed, really successfully. We're on version 7, I think, of our curriculum model after constantly reflecting and refining, and we've come to a really good balance now about keeping the humanities AOLE approach, but also keeping the subject disciplinary approach as well.
Yeah.
So our big theme is environment, and in year 7 we're looking at whether industrialisation was progressive and regressive. So within that unit, we are using excerpts from a non-fiction historical 19th century book called Liberty's Dawn. So we're just extracting, you know, sections or extracts or paragraphs, and then really exploring the language, the vocabulary, and that's where reading we considered as worked like a dream for us. We're looking at protest in year 8, so we're looking at suffragettes within that theme. So we've picked out Death in 10 Minutes by Fern Riddell, and then I think our mutual favourite book, The Five.
It is, yeah.
Harry Rubenholz, we've linked that in, and we use that significantly with our year 9 learners, and we've just completed that unit of study as well in the autumn term. So it's not every lesson, but what we have is whether it's an excerpt, whether it's a paragraph, it's just about exposing these learners to this type of academic language and giving them the skills and the confidence that they need, that they can decode and unpick and use strategies to understand the inference and the messages behind them. And I think they're just becoming far more confident. Our year 7 learners are flying with it because they don't know any different. Year 8 similarly, year 9 needs a bit of cajoling, but I think they'll see the benefit now when they go through to GCSE, because for our subject discipline, they're going to be dealing with, you know, 16th century contemporary texts that they're going to have to understand about how to, you know, extract the understanding of what that, you know, that particular message that person is saying. So at the moment, it's working really well. And it's costing us a fortune on Amazon on books to see what's out there at the moment. But I think it's also really engaging learners because we start to really dispel stereotypes of what a historian is, you know, and historian can be, you know, a woman in her 20s or 30s. It's not some you know, sort of stereotype of an academic who sort of never gets out of an office, which I think a lot of them expected it to be. So I think there's a lot of links there across, you know, sort of gender stereotypes as well that we seem to be breaking down a lot with our learners.
And of course, you're also doing that through the choice of text that you're picking, because, you know, talking about Harry Rubenwald and the author's text that you're picking up, you're deliberately trying to you know, tell the stories of people that have been othered really in society, haven't you? So, you know, The Lives of the Five, for example, tells the untold story of Jack the Ripper's victims, and the sort of misconceptions around the reporting of those murders, and sort of gives those women a voice in and that's our theme. We know we don't look at Jack the Ripper, we don't mention Jack the Ripper in that unit. Our question is, why did those women not receive justice? You know, and the idea then we're really delving into the social issues of the time, and whether those stereotypes, you know, and I know you've listened to it as well, but the podcast recently that came out on this, you know, we've played that to the learners, you know, certain elements of it, because she adds so much more depth to things she's put in her book. And that's worked really well. And I think unconsciously, when I think about mapping across our Key Stage 3, we're very much focusing on those sort of hidden voices that
are really emerging. So Liberty's Dawn is all about the stories of the working class people in 19th century society, the suffragette movement. We've also going to try and build in David Olusoga's Black and British when we start looking at things like the Bristol boycotts and the race issue, when we start looking at that as well. So I think there's been a bit of an unconscious bias, I suppose, really, to try and give a voice to those people within history that haven't necessarily been focused on up until now.
And that's great that looking at your reading curriculum in this way last year has given you an opportunity and to reflect on that and to be able to bring those things in, isn't it? That it's very easy sometimes to keep doing what we do, and actually with all the changes that have gone in society in the last 2-3 years, and the rise in sort of the Black Lives Matter protests, and that's what our children, our young people are living and breathing. So being able to bring that into your curriculum is a great thing.
It's points of reference for them that they've, we used to teach topics like Days That Shook the World, for example, before the curriculum for Wales. And when I reflected back on it, I was teaching things that were relevant in my lifetime, or when, really, sort of formative events when I could remember them. There's no relevance to the learners at all at the moment in some of those things. They've heard of them. But things like the Black Lives Matter is far more relevant when we are teaching them the history of why that happened and that contextual information. So we found it really powerful. And I think as well, auditing our reading provision has really allowed us as a department to go down a different road in terms of professional dialogue. Prior to this, it's, everything would be about exam classes, year 10, year 11, what are we doing? And that's fine. But it's about making sure that if we're equipping them with the skills in Key Stage 3, that passion, that resilience, the confidence, then everything should be slotting into place then in year 10 and 11.
Which is exactly the ethos, isn't it, of Curriculum for Wales?
Absolutely.
So talking about that, I mean, I know you and I have talked about sort of sequencing and progression in reading quite a few times, and I'm sure you won't mind me saying, when we did the audit, that was something that sort of really jumped out, wasn't it? That staff, and I think this would be common to a lot of schools, were picking texts because of how they link to the topic, rather than looking at potentially knowing the reading age of the materials that they were presenting, or thinking about how progressive those materials were in terms of, okay, well, is this more challenging than what we presented in year 7, and how is it more challenging, because text can be challenging in different ways. So I just wonder, what steps are you taking as a school, or how you plan to look at that idea of sequencing and progression of reading?
I think I'm really conscious at the moment of staff well-being and workload with everything that's coming up at the moment. So at the moment, we have made huge strides forward in terms of mapping whole school in terms of progression within and across AOLEs in terms of reading. What my aim is this academic year is to get the history curriculum right and demonstrate a plan for progression where I can show the sequencing of texts within and across year groups. So I've got my sort of vision of what I'm expecting by the end of year 9. We've got our select texts, and then we're constantly playing about with them to make sure that we can show progress from year 7, within year 7, then the transition to year 8 and the transition to year 9. And the idea then is that will be shared with AOLE leads or curriculum leads then for the next academic year to support them as they start to plan ahead then for Key Stage 3, because if we can get year 7 right next year, I think that would be a really good foundation. But I think I'm really conscious of everything that's been thrown as staff at the moment. That it's about sort of taking sort of measured steps and not expecting too much too soon. So I thought if we could trial things in history, offer a proposed model that staff can use their next year to play about with and use and make it more bespoke to their subject-specific discipline, with a view then of probably reviewing it, I would like the end of next autumn term to see where everybody is, and then we can start mapping whole school.
And I think that's really important, isn't it? Rome wasn't built in a day, and we can't change things overnight. We're battling a really tough situation in school with the desire to also, enact school improvement. And and you know, your staff well-being can't suffer as a result of that. And so I think that's a really, you know, wise decision to take that measured approach. And it's little things, isn't it? Like, I remember as part of the audit, we were looking at the length of text that staff were presenting to children, and you know, if for example by year 10 and 11 we were expecting them to read sort of 400 words independently, if we're only ever feeding them a diet of 200 words all the way through, you know, 7, 8 to 9, we're never going to get to that resilience. And so it's little things like that, isn't it? Being aware of the text length, even if you haven't got the headspace to think about reading ages, or right, okay, we're going to get to the sequencing, you know, potentially in the autumn term when we've got you know, a little bit more headroom, we can think about things like that, can't we? The text
absolutely
length.
Yeah, it's about being strategic now, I think, isn't it? And about prioritizing, but you know, like I said, being mindful of the fact that there's so much change going on at the moment, whilst GCSEs are still running historically as they were. So then, you know, things aren't, it's slightly disjointed, isn't it? But the principles of what we're trying to do in Key Stage 3, then we've got the content heavy GCSEs at Key Stage 4. So it's all, as classroom practitioners, it's all up in the air a bit at the moment, isn't it?
A balancing act, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know quite a bit today. We've mentioned Reading Reconsidered, and obviously you and the head of English attended our Reading Reconsidered training. Just to give everyone a bit of a background, Reading Reconsidered is developed by Doug Lemoff, who's the author of Teach Like a Champion, and it's a really rigorous and intensive training program, sort of designed to improve the pedagogy and practice really of reading. So I just wondered how that's helping you shape your work on reading in Pencoed.
It's transformed my practice. I think after the first couple of sessions, myself and Danielle, who's the head of English, we came away eager to put things into practice straight away. And to some extent, you had to stop yourself from kicking yourself and thinking, oh, this is so straightforward. It's just a tweak in terms of your pedagogical approaches. But yeah, I think it's made me ensure that I'm not presuming too much. It's really allowed me a really good focus and vocabulary, and ensuring we're empowering the learners before we expect them to delve into any pieces of texts. So within our PLC programme at the moment, we have we've asked for you know, sort of a wide cross section of staff to join the PLC. So we're running Reading Reconsidered, and we've got a massive cross-section of departments and AOLEs where we've delivered the Control the Game training and the Accountable Independent Reading. So those are the two strategies. Everybody's gone away to action research, ready for the next one now on February the 10th is our third PLC. But in terms of practice within the department and my own personal practice, it just made me stop and think. And I genuinely, I can't recommend it highly enough. It was superb training.
It sounds like you're an advert for it.
and there's been no prompting whatsoever.
No,
but yeah, we've, you know, myself and Mrs. Smith, we have tried to encourage as many practitioners as possible that we've spoken to outside of Pencoed to get involved. We've got some really keen members of staff here who have been willing to try things. Due to my new remit now within school, I've been taken off a fair bit of Key Stage 3. So I spent time passing on the training to the new team that's really forming in the history department. So I know that there's consistent approaches. And I think that's the key to the Reading Reconsidered approach, that it can't just be one person in a department leading this. It has to be disseminated, and it's got to be a consistent approach within a school and also across phase opportunities as well.
Because I know, obviously, you know, the Reading Reconsidered is designed as a sort of train-the-trainer model, and practitioners who engage in the professional learning then go back to schools and disseminate that. And you've got a great vehicle for that in your PLCs. But I also know that we've got inset planned in the spring term to cascade that to staff. But you know, in Pencoed, you've got a really strong cluster working arrangement as well. I just wondered if you could talk about what's going on with the cluster with regards to this work on reading and Reading Reconsidered, and sort of any links or joint.
As the literacy coordinator, I was really keen to make links with our cluster colleagues and used really lockdown online learning opportunities to sort of try and make contact with them. So we had a couple of Teams meetings where we just got to know each other. We, you know, had a chat about where we are in terms of our schools. Really, no threat, no promises what we were going to work on, but just really trying to build a team ethos. And we're fortunate now we can meet face to face. So I think we've met frequently once half a term now, over the past 12 months. And, you know, they're lovely meetings where everybody comes with ideas. So what we've decided upon is a focus on reading, and we are currently looking to work on a cross-cluster reading policy.
Yeah.
So I was really fortunate, myself and the head of English were really fortunate through your support. We linked up with Willows High, and we're lucky enough to spend some time with Nicola Lachelso and Kelly Bubbins, who gave us lots of feedback and ideas about how we could extend, because I felt we were at a point with our literacy links, but we needed to step it up a little bit. We needed to make sure that we were making an impact in terms of learning provision. So as I said, we've all got an agreed focus on reading. So I know in Willows they have reading habits, which they agreed with their cluster colleagues as well. And those reading habits, then we propose to have a cluster. We've rebranded them as reading keys, because we'd like to have, you know, unlocking the keys to success or to reading. We're going to brand it. My cluster colleagues have trialed these within their classrooms. We've used dual coding. We've made it really simple, with a view then of trying to launch them across the phases for September, so that by the time our learners come up in year 7, we've got a shared vocabulary and approaches to reading. And I've also been, you know, we've given them feedback on Read and Reconsider. They're all really interested. So hopefully some of them will be able to access the Read and Reconsider training, because I think that will take our cross-phase approaches to another level if those learners then have those skills and from those really approaches. I think it'll be so powerful, and will really support the whole transition, the academic transition process as well. So that's something that we're really trying to strive for at the moment. But I think as a cluster, we're really fortunate that everybody's got the same focus. We've got the support of our respective head teachers who are really positive and willing to give us the time to meet. And as a model, it's really working at the moment.
I think what you said there about the shared language is really important, isn't it? And that's also fundamental to curriculum in Wales, is if we're all speaking the same language, that it makes transition so much easier, doesn't it? But I think what you say there about that unifying your pedagogical approach to reading, either through Read and Reconsidered or whatever vehicle that you choose, is an important thing, isn't it? Because again, it's aiding that transition. I know you mentioned there, obviously you visited Nicola and Kelly in Willows, and I know Willows have developed a reading canon that they've spoken about. Is that on the cards at all in Pencoed?
It is, it's been on the agenda. So what we've started to do is compile, really. So we've got a shared Teams account. So I've just put a document up there, and I've asked our literacy colleagues and our second in English to start auditing the types of books, what we've got available, what we ask the learners to read. So the idea will be, hopefully by the end of the summer, we will have a literary canon then that we can publish and brand and share with learners and share with parents as well, to support that culture of reading. The other thing we did after visiting Willows was a book raffle, because we're really trying to ensure that learners have access to books as well. So we had a book raffle where we asked staff to contribute brand new non-fiction books and fictional books as well, to a bit of an appeal for us. We wrapped them all up, wished Merry Christmas to lots of children. We tried to hit our EFSM learners, and we've got enough left over now. So we managed to get all EFSM learners had a book for Christmas across year 7 and year 8. And we've got enough left over now that our year 9 and 10 learners will have an Easter raffle at the end of the spring term as well. We didn't let on it was for EFSM learners. We just said that it was just generic raffle, and the kids haven't picked up on it. But our next step now is trying to find those children and say, did you read the book? What did you think of it? Because I'd like to get some review cards up in the library then, so they can take ownership of that shared space.
That's lovely. And that idea as well of that literary canon, that again being a shared experience across phase is so important as well, isn't it? No, that's really great. Thank you for talking so openly today. Just as a closing question, if a school was going to look at developing a reading curriculum, what advice would you give them about how to approach this and where to start?
Don't be overwhelmed. I think it's about reassuring staff that this isn't an added piece of workload. This is something that is going to make a significant difference to learner progression, engagement, and you will see impact. And I think you mentioned it earlier, the Rome isn't built in a day, is it? You know, we've got to make sure that we are prioritising what needs to be done while spinning so many other plates at the moment, in terms of curriculum reform and GCSE and a whole host of other things. So I think it's not to be too overwhelmed. I think that starting point, getting staff to think about the diet of reading experiences across curriculum areas is a crucial point, because it just starts conversations and gets departments to really reflect. And I think that cross-phase cluster work, you know, if schools haven't done so already, I think really trying to foster that links with primary colleagues as well, to see what they are doing to ensure there's no repetition, or the things could, you know, progress can be made. I think that would be something that's really important as well.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of our podcast. So thank you to Louise and Pencoed for being so open and honest with us today. And I hope you've enjoyed listening.
Diolch am wrando ar y benod hon o Sgwrs. Cofiwch ein dilyn ar Twitter a Facebook, tanysgrifio ein sianel YouTube, ymuno yn cymunedau ar ein gwefan a darllen ein bwletin ysgolion wythnosol am y newyddion diweddaraf. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sgwrs. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter and Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, join our online communities via our website, and read our weekly school bulletin for the latest news. Hwyl am y tro. Bye for now.